There is a comforting lie that most people believe without ever questioning it, a quiet assumption that evil is easy to recognize. That monsters look different, that danger announces itself, that if you were ever face to face with something truly horrific, you would feel it, instantly. But history tells a very different story. Because the most terrifying individuals to ever exist did not hide in caves, did not wear masks, and did not isolate themselves from society. They walked among ordinary people. They worked jobs, attended gatherings, spoke politely, and blended into the rhythm of everyday life so perfectly, that no one ever suspected what they were capable of. And that is what makes them truly frightening. Not just what they did, but how easily they lived among everyone else while doing it. Luis Alfredo Garavito was one of those men. If you saw him on the street, you wouldn't remember him. He didn't stand out. He wasn't intimidating. In fact, he looked almost fragile. Thin frame, soft voice, thick glasses, often carrying a Bible as if it were part of his identity. He projected something that people instinctively trusted: calmness, humility, harmlessness. And that illusion became his greatest weapon. He didn't need to chase his victims. He didn't need to force anything. He simply approached those who were already vulnerable, children living on the margins of society, those without protection, those no one was actively searching for. He offered them what they needed most: food, small amounts of money, promises of work. Simple things, but enough to build trust. And once that trust was established, he would guide them away from public spaces, into isolated areas where no one could see, no one could hear, and no one would come looking. What happened after that was not just violence. It was control. Calculated, deliberate, repeated control. Garavito did not act randomly. He followed patterns. He kept records, dates, locations, descriptions. His mind worked like a system, cataloging each act as if it were part of a larger structure. It wasn't chaos, it was organization, and that made it even more disturbing. For years, bodies were discovered in different regions, but no one connected them. The victims were often dismissed as casualties of broader social issues: conflict, poverty, instability. There was no urgency, no unified investigation, no recognition that something far more systematic was happening. And so he continued, unnoticed, unchallenged, invisible, until something changed. A survivor. One child managed to escape, and that single moment disrupted years of silence. For the first time, there was a description, a consistent detail, a human connection to the pattern that had gone unnoticed for so long. When authorities finally captured Garavito, there was no dramatic resistance. No denial, no attempt to hide. He spoke, and what he revealed was beyond anything they expected. He guided investigators to burial sites spread across multiple locations, revealing a scale that forced everyone to confront a terrifying reality. This wasn't a series of isolated incidents. It was a sustained pattern carried out over time by a single individual who had operated in plain sight. And yet, even after everything, the outcome left questions, anger, and a sense that justice had not fully matched the magnitude of the crimes. But Garavito was not unique in his ability to deceive. Albert Fish represents something even more difficult to understand. He did not rely on strength or intimidation. He relied on perception. An elderly man, quiet, polite, seemingly harmless. The kind of person people instinctively lower their guard around. He knew exactly how he was seen, and he used that to his advantage. For decades, he moved through society without raising suspicion, carrying within him impulses that even professionals struggled to explain. His actions were not impulsive outbursts. They were driven by deeply rooted compulsions that blurred the line between control, obsession, and something far more disturbing. One of his most infamous crimes began with something simple: a conversation, a promise, a moment of trust. A young girl believed him. Her family saw no reason to doubt him. And then she disappeared. Time passed, and then came the letter. Not a typical confession, not an apology, not an attempt to explain. It was something colder, detailed, structured, calm, the kind of writing that removed emotion entirely, replacing it with precision. That tone, more than anything else, revealed the true nature of the mind behind it. There was no guilt, no hesitation, just a recounting of events as if they were ordinary. That letter led to his capture. But what authorities discovered went far beyond the crime itself. His behavior, his mindset, his complete detachment from the moral weight of his actions, it created a profile that was as unsettling as it was difficult to fully comprehend. He wasn't unaware. He wasn't confused. He knew. And that awareness, combined with a total absence of remorse, made him one of the most disturbing figures in criminal history. Then there was Gary Ridgway, a man who demonstrated that the most dangerous individuals are often the ones who fit in perfectly. He lived a structured life. He worked, maintained relationships, participated in his community. Nothing about his external life suggested anything unusual, and that normality became a shield. Because no one looks for monsters in familiar places, he targeted individuals who were already vulnerable, those whose disappearances would not immediately trigger widespread concern. That choice wasn't accidental, it was strategic. It allowed him to operate longer, to avoid attention, to remain undetected. His methods were not elaborate. They didn't need to be. They were simple, direct, repeatable. And that simplicity is what made them effective. But what made his case truly unsettling was not just the number of victims. It was what he did afterward. The pattern of returning, revisiting, reliving. It transformed the crimes from acts of violence into something ritualistic, something controlled and repeated with intention. For years, suspicion surrounded him. But suspicion is not proof. And without proof, he remained free. Until science intervened, DNA evidence provided the connection that had been missing for so long. It turned suspicion into certainty. And when confronted with that certainty, Ridgway adapted. He confessed, not out of guilt, but out of calculation. In exchange for avoiding execution, he revealed details that only he could know, turning himself into both perpetrator and source of information. It was a final act of control, choosing how his story would be told. Robert Pickton's story unfolds differently, but carries the same underlying pattern. A place that seemed ordinary. A routine that appeared normal. And beneath it, something hidden. His property became the center of a long, complex investigation. For years, individuals disappeared, and their cases did not immediately connect. The same pattern repeated: vulnerable people, limited attention, delayed recognition. When the truth began to surface, it did so gradually. Evidence layered over time, details that, when combined, painted a picture far darker than anyone expected. The location itself became part of the story, a physical space that concealed repeated actions over an extended period. And when investigators finally uncovered what had been hidden, it forced a confrontation with the reality of how long something like this could exist without being fully understood. Pedro Lopez operated across borders, adapting to different environments, different communities. His mobility became his advantage. He didn't stay in one place long enough to be easily tracked, and he targeted those least likely to be protected. What made his case particularly disturbing was not just the scale, but the way he remembered everything. He didn't rely on written records. His memory held the details, faces, locations, sequences. It was internalized, structured, organized in a way that allowed him to recall events with precision. When he was captured, his willingness to speak created a paradox. Cooperation combined with a complete absence of remorse. Information without emotion. And then, release. A decision that left behind unanswered questions and a lingering sense of unease. Because once someone like that disappears, there is no certainty about what comes next. David Parker Ray represents another evolution. Control through preparation. He didn't rely on improvisation. He created an environment specifically designed for his actions. Everything had a purpose. Every element was planned. It transformed his crimes into something structured, something almost mechanical. He even anticipated the experience from the perspective of his victims, preparing recorded messages that explained what would happen. It removed unpredictability and replaced it with design. His case only came to light because of survival. One person escaped, and that single break in the pattern exposed everything. What investigators found confirmed long-term activity, detailed planning, and a level of organization that suggested far more than what could be immediately proven. Tsutomu Miyazaki's case introduces another layer: the role of isolation and internal reality. He existed within a world shaped by his own perceptions, disconnected from broader social norms. His actions reflected that disconnect, creating patterns that were both disturbing and difficult to categorize. Rodney Alcala showed how charisma could be weaponized. He didn't just blend in, he stood out in a positive way. He created opportunities through charm, through interaction, through presence. And that made him effective. Because people trusted him, and trust, once again, became the entry point. Anatoly Slivko demonstrated a different kind of control. Not just action, but observation, documentation, analysis. His behavior reflected a desire not only to dominate, but to study, to preserve, to revisit moments repeatedly. Across all these cases, the details differ. The locations change, the methods evolve, but the underlying pattern remains the same. They understood people, they understood trust, they understood invisibility, and they used all of it. That is the part that lingers. Not just the actions themselves, but the realization that none of this required isolation, secrecy, or disappearance from society. It happened in plain sight, over and over again, and even now, it forces a question that has no comfortable answer. If the most dangerous individuals can look like anyone, then how do you ever truly know who you're standing next to? Because sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't the darkness you can see. It's the darkness that learns how to blend into the light.